All right, I guess we can get started. Um, just gonna close my window here. Yeah, good morning, everyone. Thank you for taking the time to join us today. We're gonna talk about logic models and how we can use them when we are planning a grant proposal, and also how we can develop a model for inclusion into a grant proposal. So let's get started. So see. Oh, now this thing doesn't want to. Okay. So here's kind of a general outline of what I will cover today. So I'll start by saying what is a logic model, what are the components of a logic model, how to develop a logic model, and then we'll end up by talking about why it is important to include logic models in grant applications. So when we're developing a grant proposal, of course, we know that we have to include all the information relevant to the question we want to answer. Well, kind of say, okay, say, provide background information, say what the problem is that we want to address, what are we proposing, all of that. But also we need to keep in mind that as we prepare a grant proposal, we need to remember that we have to include elements to convince the reviewers that our project is important, that is academically sound, that we have really planned it and taking into account all the different factors that may affect um, the outcomes. And also we want to make sure that it looks that it's feasible. As we know, as reviewers, some of us have served as reviewers of grant proposals. In some cases, you are not, well, the reviewer see a project and sees way too ambitious and therefore not feasible, and it doesn't get funded. Even though it may have a wonderful idea, it just doesn't get funded. So we're going to see, and so again, as we're developing a grant proposal, I'm not sure about you, but let me see here, having trouble here. In my case, many times when I start planning a grant proposal, if I feel like I have too much information in my head about what I want to do, and usually I ask the question is, where do I begin? There's so much in my head, so many ideas. And if you are in a team, of course, ideas coming from different angles. So this question of where do I begin, I think that logic models could help us answer this question. So, well, let's see, what is a logic model? A logic model is a graphic way of showing what you plan to do in your project and what are the expected results. There are different ways of doing logic models. If you kind of Google logic model, you'll see different types of diagrams. But you are seeing here is one of the most common ones that is used in grant proposals. And also I want to say that we're talking today about using a logic model to kind of plan, develop a grant proposal, but keep in mind the logic models can be used for other purposes, like if you are trying to evaluate a program, or you want to just focus on a single type of goal and plan in detail that goal. It can also be used for that purpose. Let me see. This says they don't hear anything. Somebody said in the chat that they don't hear anything.
That could be their audio settings because I'm hearing you fine.
Can the rest of the participants hear me okay?
Everyone else in the
Uh,
chat says that they can hear you.
yeah. So John, maybe it's your settings. It seems like, let me see. Let me just maybe type. Um, Nice. Okay, John. I hope he can hear us. John, can you? Okay. Oh, okay, great. All right, so let's continue. So yes, I was saying, and John, perhaps you missed it, that I was saying a logic model is a graphic and simple way of describing what you plan to do with your project and what are the expected results. And one of the most common diagrams used for logic models is what you are seeing here. If you Google logic models, you are going to see different ways of arranging the information. And I said logic models can be used for other purposes, such as evaluation, planning specific projects. But today we're going to focus on how to use the logic model for developing a grant proposal. So as I said earlier, when you are preparing your proposal, we need to keep in mind that we need to convince the reviewers that our project is important and should be funded. So here's I found this funny cartoon. This is our simplified logic model. So you have to provide enough information to convince the reviewer to give you money. And in terms of the outcomes, so you can show that all of us win. I mean, as a researcher, you accomplish your goals, and the funding agency will support the goals they're interested in by providing funding for your project. Now, let's talk about the logic model in more detail. Here are some of the key components of the logic model, and I'm showing kind of like a general, and I say key components because if you Google logic models, and you'll see that in some cases there are additional details included, but these ones I'm showing here are the basic ones. And we're going to walk through each of them to understand what they involve. So let's start with the inputs. So as you can see, there are inputs, activities, outputs, outcomes, and impact. So let's start with the inputs. So the inputs are going to be the resources that you need to implement your project. So, and for example, you're going to need, of course, in a grant proposal, of course, you need funding, right? You're writing that because you need the funding, but also this gives you an opportunity to think about other potential sources of funding, like whether you could get perhaps donations, or you are going to implement a program that will bring in money. So that's an example of resource. Another important resource is human resources. So you need to think about, as you can see here, faculty, staff, also partnerships that you may enter into with organizations, volunteers, etc. The physical resources are all another area to keep in mind, like equipments, reagents, facilities, materials, and other things. These are just examples, but you can think of other areas. For example, I don't know, technology. You're going to need, if you are, for example, in a computer science area, that you're going to need, I don't know, well, we'll be into physical resources, computers, servers, etc. And something that I want to point out here is that you will see later when you start preparing your budget that these inputs are going to relate to your budget. Like, for example, if you're going to say, well, I want to give stipends to faculty, I want to hire 20 students, I want to buy 20 computers, or I'm going to want to purchase software. So all these elements here and the inputs will help you with your budget. Here is an example of inputs, and this example comes from a partnership for innovation in education. I have included the link. The goal of this partnership is to increase the number of K-12 students who enroll and graduate in STEM degrees. So this organization acknowledges that there is deficiency in terms of people with STEM skills. And I think some of us in the STEM fields know that there is a need to increase the number of people with these kinds of skills. So I borrowed their logic model because I think it's in a way relatable to what we do, and also just to show specific examples of inputs. So here you can see in the logic model the inputs, human resources, which in this case are personnel and partnerships, physical resources, you can see here the equipment, additional things like the intellectual property. For example, you can see there that they plan to develop a mobile app and also have a digital platform. So those are kind of like some of the examples of resources. Now let's move on and now talk about the next component, which are activities. So once you have all those inputs, all those resources, the next step is to think about what are you going to do with those resources, and that translates into activities. And examples is, okay, I have, as an input, I have a financial resource that will allow me to do data collection, analysis, interpretation, so that maybe later I can publish a paper. Or maybe with the money that you get, you're going to develop courses, offer workshops or other training programs. Or also maybe you are kind of planning some events to engage the community. So these are some examples. And in this next slide, we can go back to the example I mentioned before, kind of this case study where this organization is trying to increase the number of students who enroll and graduate in STEM degrees. So remember, in the previous slides, we have like the inputs, and now in this case, the examples of the specific activities they plan to do are indicated here. And I'm not going to read all of them, but just kind of to see, okay, so I'll mention just a couple. For example, okay, so I got the money now, so I can do I kind of assess what are the needs in my community. Maybe I can start with the inputs of providing stipends for faculty. Maybe now the activity is that they're going to develop an experiential learning curriculum. Maybe I'm going to pay a different faculty to develop and conduct training for the teachers and so on. And kind of like the next step after you have, okay, so you have your inputs, there are your resources, and with those resources, you develop a lot of activities. And then we have to include the outputs. So you have to, as you can see here, the outputs are going to be the products of the result of those activities. And in general, these have to be quantifiable. And I have included here some examples. Okay, so if you gather the data and analyze that was part of your activity, okay, so how many publications or presentations were produced? Maybe your faculty develop workshops, so you have to include there as an output how many workshops you delivered, how many participants did you reach out, or if you engage with the community, how many kind of with the number of organizations in the community that you work with. Or if you are gathering data, another potential output could be how many data sets you have produced. And now going back to our case study, so remember we have the inputs, and then here in this first column, we have what we mentioned in our previous slides, which is the activities, and then here we have the outputs. And in this case, the outputs are very general. And as I mentioned before, you'll see there are different ways of doing it. Some outputs are very general. In this case, okay, how many businesses did we reach in our activities? How many educators did we train? How many students got involved, for example, in experiential learning? In other cases, as I'll show you in some slides later, the outputs are more specific. It could be, for example, the number of businesses who provided experiential learning activities. It could be number of educators who adopted experiential learning in their classes. So you'll see there are different variations, but it's just here to show what the outputs look like. And after you have the outputs, the next component of a logic model are the outcomes. And the outcomes, as you can see, are changes or benefits that are resulting from this project. And in general, again, you'll see variations. Some logic models just kind of list outcomes, and that's it. But other logic models are a little bit more specific and show short, intermediate, and long-term outcomes. And just to show that, here is going back to the previous example about the increasing the number of students in STEM fields. So we have, in general, that the short-term outcomes involve a change in learning. And in this case, it could be maybe that the students now have, well, some kind of assessment was done, and now in this case, the school knows that the student body has increased their knowledge in STEM fields. Or it could be that maybe the students have improved their skills, and as you can see, analyzing facts, problem-solving skills, critical thinking skills. So that's kind of like if you will, like a low-level kind of outcome or an immediate level, and that involves changes in learning. Then for the medium term, it's something that is a little bit more permanent and wider, which would involve case in behavior, or change in behavior, rather. And the example I'm here kind of showing in red is that something is going to have kind of more of an impact. And you can see in this case, if the educators now are adopting the experiential learning in their classes, that's an impact that now is impacting their behavior. Or they're using, as you see, now hands-on curricular materials for their classes. And then after that, we have kind of a longer-term impact or outcome, which involves kind of changing general conditions, whether it's in a school or a society. The scale is going to vary depending on the project you are focusing on. But in this case, could be the long-term outcome that now more students are choosing STEM majors. And then as a consequence of that, then more students could now be entering into careers in STEM fields. And in some logic models, you will see that the long-term outcomes are referred to as impact. So it varies. Now, something else to consider are what they call assumptions. And you will see logic models. Some logic models only include what I have mentioned, like the inputs, activities, outputs, and outcomes. Some of them don't include assumptions, but other logic models do. So it depends on how you want to plan your logic model. But for example, assumptions could include community support. So for example, you are assuming, for example, in your proposal, you are saying, well, I'm going to partner with a community that provides, I don't know, STEM education programs after school or something like that. So you are assuming that you're going to have that partnership. Or you're going to say, well, I'm going to analyze 10,000 samples of X. Well, you're assuming that you have enough equipment and adequate equipment to do that. So, or enough people to run those tests. Going back to the example that we have been discussing with the K-12 STEM program, Here, the assumption is that the business would engage in the educational process. So as you can see, well, we didn't go into detail, but the activities, one of the activities they listed was that they will partner with businesses to engage in STEM education. So here the assumption is that the businesses are going to be willing to work with them. And also in the activities, they mentioned the development of a mobile app. And again, they're assuming that a university will help them develop that app. Also, in the activities, they mentioned training for teachers. And again, here the assumption would be that another university is going to provide that type of development. In a way, I guess it's good to include the assumptions so that you don't run into problems when you're trying to actually execute your project, that you may assume something that may not be realistic. So I think in general, it's good to include the assumptions. Or if you're not including it in your model that you're going to include in your grant proposal, maybe just kind of be aware of it. Another component are external factors. So you might be aware of existing policies. If, yeah, for example, in this case, the external factors in this case are aware that the learning standards are different for science and math are different by state. And that some of these regulations by the Department of Education change regularly. So again, those are things that you have to consider as you are planning your project. And just putting everything together, this is how the Partnership for Innovation and Education logic model looks. And you can see we have the inputs that we talk about, all the resources we're going to need to develop and implement our project. We have our activities here. And then here you can see activities and outputs are kind of clustered together. It's kind of unusual. Usually in other models, you see activities separate from the outputs, but here they put them together. But again, here the activities, what we're going to do based on the resources we have. The outputs is what are the measurable results that we got from those activities. And as I said before, maybe in this case is how many businesses were engaged with the programs that we're developing, how many educators we train, how many students are now involved in some of those learning activities. And then we have here the outcomes that we mentioned, short-term, medium-term, long-term. And assumptions and external factors are also included. Here is another example of a logic model. In this case, is the purpose of this project was to increase the number of people who have health education. And so you can see here, like the inputs, it could also include an advisory committee, partnerships. In this case, in terms of financial resources, they have memberships, relationships with universities. You can see some of the activities here, networking events, professional development, social events, conferences, advocacy programs, and you can see the outputs associated with those. And again, you can see here the outputs should be quantifiable. Okay, how many networking events did we have? How many professional development opportunities we conducted? How many number of social events and so on. And again, you can see the short, intermediate, and long-term outcomes. And usually, as I mentioned before, sometimes you see impact as a separate kind of paragraph that includes kind of a statement of how this whole project is changing maybe the community, a school, whatever scale you are working on. But in other cases, the impact is included in the long-term outcomes. For example, here, going back to what I said, that this is for health educators, You can see the long-term impact is provide resources and connections for emerging health educators to fill the gap in the field of health education and strengthen the workforce of health educators. All right, now let me show you another example. This is actually something that we got. It's actually something was submitted in an NSF proposal. There is a program that's called STEM, and the purpose of this program is to provide scholarships for students in the STEM fields. And you can see here, like, for example, that the inputs are arranged slightly different. They are arranged kind of by areas, which is another way of presenting this type of information. Again, the activities, short, intermediate, and long-term outcomes. In this case, you can see they included external factors. They did not include assumptions, but at least they included the external factors. So as you start kind of getting ready to develop a logic model, you need to think about some of these things. Okay, so that we already kind of talk about. So first, of course, and you already know this, you have to be clear about what kind of problem you're going to try to solve. And then again, start just kind of making a list to identify the inputs, a list of all the things that you think you are going to need for the project. And of course, include what activities you're going to do, what kind of outputs you're going to produce. And in terms of outputs, also, I think for grant reviewers, it helps to see what you are actually producing, because sometimes, and some of the proposals I have reviewed, I think sometimes when people are preparing the proposals, they forget to think about the outputs. For example, they mention, okay, we're going to develop this new method and this and that, and then kind of landing that general idea into specific results sometimes is not very clear. And of course, a grant reviewer is not going to see that very favorably. So just think carefully about what you're going to produce as a result of the activities. And of course, very important, number 5 here, what kind of outcomes and impact your project is going to have. This is going to help kind of emphasize why your project is important and why it should be funded. Additional areas to keep in mind as you are using a logic model, and initially, of course, in your planning of your grant proposal, is to ensure that it aligns with the objectives or the goals of the funding agency. So if your funding agency states that they want to provide funding so that the number of students, let's say I have been showing a lot of examples of STEM, but maybe, and then liberal arts majors is increased, or so then you have to show that it has to tie with your objectives. If you are using something is innovative, you have to include it too, kind of try to highlight it. You have any data that substantiates your logic model, just kind of include that in there. Like, I cannot think on top of my head of any data, but of course, I think preaching to the choir, you guys know that you need to use data to back up your statements. But in this case, for example, if you are proposing a new method, and you have some information that shows that it's very likely to be successful, then include that information there. And last but not least, the evaluation plan. You need to also show that that you will consider this in mind, because as we know, many times our projects don't go as we plan. And so if you show that you are aware of that situation, that you're going to be constantly assessing whether you are reaching your goals, and then you're going to do that through an evaluation process, and that the evaluation process shows that you need to tweak your project, then include that information. So it brings kind of good, I guess, brownie points, if you will, with the with the reviewers, because they will see that you are aware and you're going to be constantly monitoring the progress of your project to ensure it is successful. And the other thing that is important of the logic models to include in grant applications, and here let me kind of point out that some grant applications I'll let you include a logic model. Other ones require them. Other ones just don't say anything about it. But for example, for the National Science Foundation, if you include a logic model, I remember reading somewhere, and I could not find the quote, that if you include a logic model, your project is more likely to be funded. And I think that perhaps the reason is because it gives you a snapshot of your project. As we know, some of these projects that we submit to National Science Foundation or other agencies, I don't know, Department of Energy, NIH, whatever, could be very complex and could have a lot of specialized information. But with a logic model, it gives you an opportunity to show in a very brief way what you plan to do. And so if there, and actually, you know when I have reviewed proposals, if they included a logic model, first I go to the logic model kind of to get an idea of what they are doing or they're proposing to do. And then I get into the narrative, because in that way I kind of have a better understanding of what they're planning to do. So here is like for the reviewers, kind of it provides a clear and a concise framework for the project. And as you start detailing the activities and the outcomes, you can show how your project aligns with the funding agency priority. And also, as you show that you have this whole process really well thought out and planned, then it shows that you know what you're doing, that you are accountable for that project. And in communication, which relates to what I was saying earlier, is a really easy way to communicate what you plan to do in a very succinct manner, and allowing people to understand your project, particularly when it is complex. Here's an example of a template. I think we shared this template with participants at our last grant writing sprint. There are kinds of templates as you start looking for it, but this is a simple and good one. So as you start preparing for another proposal, or you can, and even it has to be a proposal, it could be any other activities that you kind of in a single a single table, you can kind of have everything that you need for your program, what you plan to do, etc. And you can see here the outcomes. You can also kind of include them in this table. You can see variations of the templates. Like this one is very similar to the previous one, but with additional two additional columns that involve evaluation. And as you can see, for example, here, indicators, what concrete measurable information you keep to track, what kind of data you're going to collect, and what kind of instruments you're going to use. So I think we have reached now the end of this presentation, and now I'll open the Zoom room for questions. And just kind of before I do that, I want to say there are a few resources I included in this presentation, and the slides will be available as soon as we complete this presentation. So, any questions?
Hi, Lucia.
Hi.
Buxton. I have a question. First of all, thank you so much. This was extremely useful for us. As you know, we submitted 2 proposals last year. One was to NSF AISL, the other one was CS4All, and both proposals didn't get funding, but they got paneled, and we got really good reviews. And and also the reviews were like strong. So we're planning
Great.
to resubmit, and one is in January deadline, the other one is in February. So having this logic model, we kind of sort of had something like this, but seeing this is now more clearly, I know what revisions I need to make. One thing I wanted to ask is, what if the logic model has a feedback loop? Like, for example, from your output or evaluation, if you get some insight, or let's say if you want to, for example, develop a curriculum with teachers and then in multiple phases, and then you evaluate it, is there a feedback loop there?
Yes, you can include it. Yes. And I said I kind of included kind of a relatively simple logic model. It can get really complex if you wish. And definitely, I think that would be a really good way to show how you're thinking about evaluation and constant assessment to adapt what you are getting and improve your outcomes. Yes, definitely. If you want, we can work with you to kind of help you develop that shows a feedback loop, and the areas will be the feedback loop and the activities and the outcomes. Yes.
Thank you. And can I send you the panel reviews, and if you can
Absolutely, yes,
Um,
yes. Please send
thank
it
you.
to us. We'll be more than glad to help you. Of course, we want you to be successful, get the money, and we're here to help. And yeah, I would love to provide feedback if we have any. Sure.
Okay, thank you. Appreciate it.
Sure. Are there any other questions? All right. Well,
Hi, Lucia. Yeah.
hi, Hua.
Yeah, I have quick questions. First of all, thank you for do the presentation. I think that's very helpful. My question is regarding the logic models, the last column, the outcome, right? On the outcome, you have a short term and a medium and long term. Do we have specific timeline? I mean, short term mean, for example, 1 year, or medium term, do we have this kind of information including that, or just kind of general speaking, short term, medium, or long term?
No, I think that's an excellent question. And actually, you should include a timeline. Like, for example, short term could be, and of course, you determine, right, what is going to be depending on your the length of your funding. But let's say you have a grant that is a 5-year grant. Yeah, like the short term could be like 1 year. Medium term will be, I don't know, 2 to 3 years, and maybe long term, 4 to 5 years. But yeah, that's very, very important, because also it's going to show the reviewers kind of how realistic your project is. If you say that you're going to kind of do something really ambitious in the first year, of course, they're going to know that that's not feasible. But yeah, that's an excellent question. Yeah, you should include a timeline.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome. Hi, we'll send you the Ellie, since I know, I'll send you the slides directly. And if you look on our website, research and sponsor programs, there is a tab that is entitled resources. We have been posting all the recordings and the slides in that tab. And but if for some reason you cannot find them, just reach out to us and we'll send them to you directly. Are there any other questions? All right, if there are no further questions, but if you can think of something after we end this meeting, feel free to reach out. We're here to help and happy to do so. So have a great weekend. Thank you.